Okay, welcome back. I know these are little bits of time, and I know it's a long day on the screen, but I appreciate everyone. We're going to go into our final session of the day for kind of slightly different presentations, but all on the theme of particularly good collaboration, engaging partners, bringing new people to the table. I'm joined first by Elise DeCola. Elise is on the East Coast, so I appreciate in the same way that Thomas is joining from vacation. I know it's evening for you there. So um, uh, Elise is a principal at Nuka Research, general manager and principal consultant, where she works on a broad range of topics related to environmental emergencies, risk assessment, and planning. For the last 10 years, she has been supporting BC First Nations engaged in collaborative marine incident response, planning, and capacity building. And Elise, I was just reflecting on your comments from earlier during the career panel, thinking back to you being a grad student in Rhode Island and cold calling Gene Cameron at the time. So many years before my time with the task force, and just appreciate how many people here have threaded through and overlap with the task force over the many years. So um, I'll hand things over to you for your presentation on this collaborative development of decision support tools.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Meg. And it was really neat to listen to all of the Legacy Award winners. And I mean, collaboration was a theme that I think has come through really all day. And so I'm happy to be talking about a particularly good collaboration that is still ongoing in a project that is being funded by NRCan's multi-partner research initiative with the support of Coastal First Nations Great Bear Initiative, which is who brought me to the table. So I just want to give a little bit of context. This will be very familiar to folks who are working in BC at the moment, but maybe not to everyone else. But the context for this particular collaboration and this coming together work is reconciliation, and specifically a reconciliation framework agreement for oceans management and governance that is in place for the northern and central coast of BC. I've got a slide in a minute that shows you the map area. But there was an agreement signed in 2018 between First Nations, the Government of Canada, and later the government of BC came on as a signatory that establishes new expectations and new ways of coming together as governance partners to manage ocean resources and to manage issues like spill planning and response and risk assessment. And so it's really fundamental to this work, I think, to appreciate that what we're doing is kind of reconciliation in real time and in real space and trying to implement some of these really important commitments that are not always easy to work through on the ground. So this particular project took off in late 2024, and we are funded through the end of the next Canadian fiscal, so March of 27. Um, we have kind of four sort of areas where we're working together. The first is around braiding knowledge systems. So really trying to take the Indigenous lens and apply it to the whole of response to risk assessment, preparedness, planning, response, recovery, and can kind of considering how those threats look through that lens and having that sort of inform how we make decisions and how we maybe understand how those decisions may play out for Indigenous communities. We're doing quite a bit of knowledge collation, not only kind of what's been done in the past, what are best practices, but also sort of envisioning new ways to collate knowledge and data. Um, all of this work is very supportive of and driven by the recognition of how important it is to build capacity for First Nations communities in BC and certainly Indigenous communities in other parts of the world to participate actively in all of the decision making that impacts their day-to-day lives and health and community health. And ultimately, what we are producing or doing here is co-developing decision support tools that are recentered to be more inclusive of and reflective of Indigenous values and viewpoints, laws, knowledge, um, that are transparent in both the inputs and the outputs and how those come together. and that are fit for purpose to enhance collaborative decision making. So we have commitments to make decisions together. How can we build tools that make that work better in the kind of pressure cooker environment that we all know to be response? And so our participation, and I would say to date, because the collaboration is continuing to grow as we work through the project, but we have Indigenous communities and organizations, and if you can see colors, you can see blue, and that's the majority of this honeycomb here, and that's on purpose. So we've had a lot of First Nation and First Nation aggregator participation. We also have federal response agencies at the table. We have the provincial response agency, the BC Ministry of Environment and Parks. And then we have various health authorities who nest at different levels of government. And we've had a steering committee that we formed at the onset of the project. Those are starred, and those organizations, we meet monthly. We've been setting agendas for the workshop that we just held, which I'll talk about in a moment. And the steering group kind of continues to guide the work that we're doing together. So one of the first things we did was a bit of a white paper, kind of a discussion document leading into our first workshop, which was a couple of weeks ago in Vancouver. And this needs and gap assessment included some kind of familiar components of here's what's out there for decision support tools, here's what's out there for best practices for blending and braiding and weaving knowledge streams. And then we also brought in a number of kind of topic areas that had been identified by the First Nation participants as particularly important to kind of establishing and setting the conversation. And so some of those key themes include the recentering of risk assessment, understanding what the capabilities and limitations are of existing tools and models. And this is a big one because, as many of you that work in modeling and you work with different algorithms and different processes and have done for quite a long time, you might be very familiar with that. If you're a First Nations community that wants to make a decision about whether to harvest food, just getting a model output isn't enough, right? It's not enough to say, okay, let's go eat from this beach. So really understanding what information is coming together, what is it telling you, and what is it maybe not, what are the limitations so that you can make informed, self-determined decisions. Um, Integrating into ICS structures and processes is a high priority for the Northern Shelf Bioregion First Nations that we've been working with because they've invested quite a bit into ICS training and capacity building. And so kind of recognizing ICS as kind of a bridging tool anyway of its own in that it brings together different perspectives and organizations with a common language and a common way of functioning. And that's actually been a really good tool for sort of equalizing some of the challenging power dynamics that sometimes come into play during response. And then finally, sharing data and creating, understanding the importance of data sovereignty when you may have an Indigenous organization or community bringing traditional knowledge, bringing cultural or archaeological data to the table. That information is incredibly important to informing decisions. And it's incredibly sensitive and something that you want to be mindful of where it goes after the response. So we had our first of 3 workshops 2 weeks ago in Vancouver. And to the right, that circle, it was our agenda. And to the left are a couple of elements that I brought in from kind of our facilitation approach. But what I want to highlight here is we did not have 2 days of talking heads with PowerPoints as much as we all love to talk and give PowerPoints. It was very much not a traditional kind of conferencey workshop. We presented the agenda as basically on a series of building activities that we did together that built. There was no podium, there was no front or back. Did a lot of kind of creative, smaller group work. And ultimately, really, we're trying to work through these concepts of first bridging knowledge systems, then braiding them, and then maybe ultimately getting to weaving them. So let me just go back to this. If you wanted to kind of look at the beginning and the end of this agenda for how we did it in time, we started with a vision for the future. And so that first activity, we basically we were split into groups. It was an interesting workshop because we ended up with a larger online contingent than we'd expected. There'd been a job action with the province, and we had a number of nation folks that couldn't attend at the last minute because of incidents. So we built on kind of the last minute a hybrid approach. And the way we were able to do that, I think, fairly successfully was by having we're working together in plenaries in the room, and then we had breakout groups that were online doing parallel activities, but separately, so not trying to brainstorm across the two modalities. So we ended up with six different groups who were essentially given a very basic scenario saying, you are at a gathering. You're at a gathering 10 years in the future, and this gathering is occurring 7 years after there was a spill in a First Nations community, a kind of hypothetical, generalized Indigenous community on the BC coast. And you are essentially, they had to define the gathering, and we gave them a number of prompts. But before we got them started, we also gave them three different sort of visions of the future. So it was interesting when the name of this session came out, I had already done the workshop. But we basically looked at sort of three different archetypes of the future. So you could have a future where you're moving forward in a good way, and that was kind of our preferred good future. You could have a stagnation and status quo future where things are kind of like they are now. So some things are working well, some things aren't. Or we could have a future where we're moving backwards and losing ground, where things are reconciliation's not taking root and things haven't gone well. And the three kind of different future horizons provided opportunities for basically for us to have kind of a creative brainstorming exercise that ultimately gave us indicators of when you're 10 years or 7 years past an incident and you're looking back, what happened that made it come out in a good way, or what happened to make you go backward and lose ground? So in the room, we had a lot of just really like basic preschool art supplies. It was a way to sort of democratize some of the brainstorming. So not everyone is a sticky note and word person. Some people are artistic. Some people have different ways of expressing themselves. And also sometimes just using your hands lets your brain kind of go. So on the left and the right are two of the in-room products. In the middle is what the online group came up with. And so the middle and the right were both moving forward in a good way. And so you see like a boom made out of handprints of the people at the table. There's different organizations that were represented, kind of a symbolic, we came together and worked together, and as a result, we had good outcomes. The one on the left from in the room was actually from the Moving Backwards and Losing Ground Future. And their gathering was a fundraiser. It was basically a music festival, but it was because a community had been impacted by a spill, didn't have the right funding and systems and decisions in place to recover. So they were now raising money for their own fundraiser. And in the middle was another kind of, it was what the online group people came up with of this idea of paddling together. And a lot of these themes kept coming up. So our second activity then we started to move into a bit more concrete. And so we basically gave people a series, so same small groups. Each group got a scenario that they were given, but a bit of a scenario with a twist. So we rooted the scenarios in four different phases of response. So initial, cleanup, recovery, post-incident. And then each little vignette scenario had a prompt, but the prompts were all centric to the viewpoint of someone from a First Nations. So this is an example one that we did in the room together before breaking out. And we had somebody representing a nation in the EU with the diesel spill. We had some where it was you are trying to explain something to your grandchildren at dinner. But it was all meant to kind of put the participants in the viewpoint of the First Nations and thinking about what elements, how are you making decisions or informing decisions, and what information do you need? So we kind of, each group sort of worked on identifying a vision, looking at their strengths and enablers, which is the bottom left, the challenges and barriers on the right. You see the online versus the in-room group. For some reason, they both liked orange or yellow and blue. And then after that activity, we kind of stopped, paused, reflected, and then came back together or came back into the groups. And they then worked on what's essentially the center of the upside down triangle, which is the possibilities. So if you look at what you have as your strengths and enablers, what are your challenges and barriers, and how do you identify possibilities that get you to the future, we sort of moved forward with that as our conversation. So the last thing we did together was to actually start to design what decision to support tools might look like based on those possibilities. So we sort of started this on the second day. We distilled out a lot of what we heard in the room into some principles and foundations. So you'll see a lot of different concepts there that I've been hearing echoed all day today. And then we brought some design seeds forward that had come out of some of those possibilities triangles to get people thinking. And then we just kind of said, reflect on these for a little bit and then envision what a DST might look like. And it was pretty wide open from there. Um, we had throughout the 2 days, we had some little spotlight sessions where we brought in people and had kind of 10-minute sort of fireside chat talks about something that had been working or something that hadn't been working to get kind of get people thinking over the course of the time. But other than that, we were pretty wide open. We gave some ideas from other places. So what could an Indigenous-centered DST look like? It could be a drone, it could be a hologram, it could be something, that nobody's thought of yet. Story bank came up, stories came up a lot. And then we set them off to create. And the creating took a better part of a day in small groups. It was interesting, it was challenging, I think, for some people, but it was really rolling up your sleeves and working together. And so we wrapped this up with what we called a knowledge fair, kind of like a twist on a science fair, again, focusing on moving forward in a good way. And we gave people a number of kind of prompts to work through when they presented their tools. And we offered a little bit of recognition at the end, which I'll speak to in a moment. And so here's just like some highlights of what we got from each of these groups, and each group were pre-designated, so they were intentionally mixed from people from different organizations and geographic areas and people that knew each other and people that didn't know each other. And we got some really kind of cool stuff back. And we're still kind of working with this now and working with bringing it back to the steering committee, but a few things I'll just kind of highlight. Bottom right there, the idea of nation-to-nation support. So the idea of a tool possibly being a way for Indigenous communities to provide expertise to other Indigenous communities or resources or personnel to kind of build a broader network because these are all people that have day jobs that are only in the spill business because somebody brought a spill to their community. The top right there was this wheel. So there was modeling clay in the room and some people were really talented. And this one was the idea that you see a little candle in the middle, their council of elders, and the idea of like a spoken wheel concept so they've got someone doing a kelp survey off a boat and you've got wildlife and you've got microscopes and there's actually a drone in kind of the back, like 11 to 12 o'clock part of the wheel. And so, yeah, just kind of super creative. We had a group that looked at the one with the kind of two canoes. They sort of moved from the left. They moved from bridging in the middle to weaving, braiding on the left to weaving on the right. Had two canoes of Indigenous and non-Indigenous people kind of moving together towards one another. And then the one on the top left and the bottom left I thought was really interesting, and it kind of spoke to how storytelling kept coming back into play. And so you see the dollar sign and you see that's a road, and so you've got the dollar sign is meant to be the money man, the outside person that's coming to a community as part of a spill. And on the right, you've got Raven, and they're walking together. And Raven is sharing their knowledge with the money man. And eventually you kind of get to the end of the path, and the money man has eventually become humanized by this experience and now has human footprints. And it's hard to see because they used a lot of 3D stuff on 2D paper. So this on the bottom left are actually those are Sour Patch Kids, like meant to represent children. There's actually Raven there on the bottom. And then, so the ending is essentially we've walked together, we've shared our perspectives, we trust you now, and now we'll bring out our elders and our children, and we can all kind of work together. So a lot happened, and that's a small part of a larger project. We are working on reporting out from the workshop and kind of coming up with design recommendations to actually develop tools. And while I know a lot of what I just showed you looked like a big art project, we actually have some pretty cool ideas that were generated. The steering committee is going to kind of come back and help refine those, and we'll bring a few of the concepts forward as prototypes to our next workshop, which will be sometime in the spring. And then we'll be presenting on all of this in the fall of next year at the International Oil Spill Science Conference, which I believe is in Montreal. So again, big acknowledgement to Coastal First Nations who have been supporting our work on this. And I had a huge collaboration team to help with the workshop and a lot of support from all of our other partners. So yeah, thank you. Really excited to share.
Thank you, Elise. And anytime you can use Sour Patch Kids in a professional setting, I think you're doing well. So that's a life goal of mine. I see a lot of kudos from folks in the reactions. I don't see any questions at this point. I'll give it a minute or so for any questions popping up in the chat or the Q&A. And we have a couple of speakers through this, and then if there are questions, there's a good chance that they relate to more than one of you. So I think at this point we'll move